In the previous movie, we learned how to place transitions on our timeline. In this movie, I'm going to show you how to modify those transitions, making them longer or shorter, or repositioning them directly within the timeline or in the Effects Control tab. The first thing I want to point out is that the default durations for both video and audio transitions is 1 second. Now, I can modify that under the Preferences for Premiere Pro. I can find this under the File drop-down menu on a Windows machine or under the word Premiere Pro on a Macintosh. I'm going to select General. You'll notice that next to Video Transition Default Duration, it says 30, because in the US, video plays back at 30 frames per second. So if I wanted this to be a half a second long, I would change 30 to 15. If you're working at another frame rate, such as Film, which is 24, or PAL, which is 25, you may want to change this to 12 frames to get a half-second video dissolve. If I want my audio to also be a half a second in duration, I can go ahead and simply type in 0.5 seconds. I'm going to press OK, and from now on, the default duration of my video transitions will be a half a second, as well as my audio transitions. Now, this preference change does not affect any transitions that are already on your timeline. So it's okay to make this change at any point while editing a project. Now let's go ahead and place a default transition at the end of our video clip. I'm going to simply right-click, apply default transition, and I'm all set. Now let me zoom in so you can see that a little bit closer. I'm going to press the plus key to zoom in and scroll to the very end of my show. So if I hover my mouse over the transition, there'll be a pop-up dialog box that will tell me that its duration is 15 frames. Now I can change that if I wanted to by grabbing the very edge of that transition and pulling it to make it longer or shorter. And as you can see in this pop-up window, it's telling me how much I'm changing it by and what the new duration is. If I wanted to, I can also right-click on it to set the transition's duration or to even delete it. But I want a little more control on my transitions. Let's go ahead and jump back to the beginning of our show and look at that very first transition that we put on in the previous video. If I select this, I see that the duration of the transition is only 24 frames, not the 30 that I expected. To look at this transition more closely, I'm going to load it back into the Source panel, into the second tab where it says Effects Control. To do this, all I have to do is simply select it and then go over to the Effects Controls tab, select that, and I can see the outgoing clip on the left and the incoming clip on the right. In the upper right-hand corner of that screen, I can see a graphic representation of the outgoing opening clip and the incoming pizza_01_A_WS.movie. And dead center between those two is my transition. Now, what I realized looking at this transition is that I've run out of media at the end of the first clip, so Premiere was doing me a favor. Instead of giving me a 30-frame dissolve, it used all the available media and gave me a 24-frame dissolve. But I feel that's too short, and I want to take control. Well, inside of this window, I can do a lot of things. In addition to stretching it out to make it longer, say, on the left side, I could stretch it out and make it longer on the right side. And I can even grab it in the middle and do a roll edit. We learned about roll edits in a previous video, so I could actually move the cut point left or right. But notice as I move this edit to the right, I'm actually seeing a change in the graphical representation of my transition. And that's these little crosshatches on the right side. Well, what is Premiere doing here? I have no extra media, but somehow it's giving me a transition anyway at the duration and position that I want. Well, whenever you see a crosshatch like this, Premiere is freezing the last frame of your video so you can actually get the duration of the transition that you want. Now, if I play this back, it's going to work just fine because the graphic ends on a white screen. Let's go ahead and play this back and see how it looks.
Welcome to Delight Gluten.
So that works very nicely. As a matter of fact, most of the time your viewer won't see that freeze frame unless you're transitioning between two objects or two elements that are moving quite quickly. So, for instance, if you're cutting a car race together, you might see the cars freeze, whereas if you're cutting, say, from an exterior of a house to the interior, you would never notice a freeze in your transition. So controlling the length of a transition is very easy to do either in the timeline or in the Effects Control tab. But what about if there's other parameters available to you in a transition? I'm going to go ahead and swap out this transition with something a little more complex. For instance, I'm going to swap out a wipe. Now, instead of digging down and trying to find where the wipe transition is, I'm simply going to type in wipe in the dialog box above all my effects, and I'll see all the available video transitions that involve wipes. So we have video effects, but if I scroll down, there's also video transitions that use wipes. And let's go ahead and select the standard wipe transition, and I'm going to drop it directly on that cross dissolve. Now, what this will show you is that if I drop it directly on the cross dissolve, now click on it, so it loads into my effects control panel. You'll notice that the duration of this wipe is 1 second and 11 frames. That was the exact duration of the previous cross dissolve. So keep in mind, if you drop a new transition on top of an old transition, it'll maintain the same duration as the transition that you've just replaced. If I wanted to cut this back down to 1 second, I can simply click on it, type 100, enter, and now it's a 1 second wipe. Now, I indicated that there's more parameters that you can work with. If we scroll down, we see that we have some choices here with our wipe. Let's watch it as it is in its default setting.
Welcome.
So it's a simple wipe left to right. As a matter of fact, I'm going to park my playhead right dead center in that transition. Now I can modify parameters of the transition and see how they affect my edit. So I want to go ahead and maybe give it a little bit of a border. And I'm going to use a virtual slider and make that about 10 or 11. And what you see here now is a nice solid black line. If I didn't want that line to be black, I could simply either click on this little box here and choose whatever color I want. Maybe I'll choose a nice blue. Or I could even select a color that's available to me, and I might want the transition's border to match the same color as in the word Delight on their logo. Now let's make it a little bit wider, and instead of going from left to right, we're going to go from right to left. We'll play back our transition and see how we like it.
Welcome to Delight Gluten-Free Eat.
So in this case, we had a few parameters we can modify, and I'd recommend just trying a bunch of different transitions and taking a look at how you can modify both their duration and their properties.